Hello, my name is Simon Wills and I'm going to talk to you today about our ancestors who joined the Merchant Navy. We're going to be looking at the records and the information that you can find about people right at the very beginning of their careers. So this photograph that I have for you here is one I rather like. It shows a group of young men who've recently joined up to the Merchant Navy, and they worked for a company called Orient Line, or more precisely, the Orient Steam Navigation Company Limited, and you can see they've got OSNC on their caps. So just a little overview of my talk. I'm going to say a little bit about what the Merchant Navy's role was, because perhaps not everyone is certain what the Merchant Navy does. Then I'm going to give you an overview of the career structure for both seamen and officers working in the Merchant Navy. Then a little bit of information about the different ways in which someone could start their employment in the Merchant Navy. And then finally, what records do we have for tracing people who've just begun their careers. This photograph here, unlike the one I showed you just now, shows a junior officer in the Merchant Navy. You often have clues to Merchant Navy employment by looking at officers' caps, because they often had a cap badge with their Merchant Navy Shipping Company logo on it. And if you look at this picture, you can probably just see the Prince of Wales feathers on his cap. So he worked for a shipping company called Prince Line. First of all, what is the Merchant Navy? Maybe that's an expression you've heard and you're not quite sure what it means. Well, the Merchant Navy is a catch-all term that describes all commercial ships. So it's passenger ships, it's cruise liners, local ferries, tugs, cargo ships, all ships that operate commercially. In the past, it was called the Mercantile Marine or the Merchant Service. The word Merchant Navy didn't really come in until just after the First World War. But you'll notice that all these expressions to describe commercial seafarers include the word mercantile or merchant, because the Merchant Navy's vital role was originally transporting goods around the British Empire, and trade was the lifeblood of the British Empire. The Merchant Navy's role was essential to that. So that's why you get the words merchant and mercantile in the title for this service. Now, it's not a single organisation. It's not like the Royal Navy. In the Royal Navy, you have a single established hierarchy of command, set types of ships, one type of uniform. In the Merchant Navy, it's very different. You had thousands of different ship owners, some very large, some tiny. Some companies didn't wear uniforms at all, some did. All their uniforms looked different. The terms and conditions of service, the pay, they were all different between the different providers. So it's quite a different setup to the Royal Navy. Ship owners, as I say, varied a lot in terms of size. So at one end you have literally one person owning one ship. And that was quite a common scenario in Victorian times, to have one person, often the captain, owning a single ship, and they use that to transport goods around the coast or to operate a ferry, for example. But you might have a family owning a ship between them, perhaps a father and a son, or a group of brothers and cousins operating a ship between them. Maybe you have a group of local businessmen who run a ship between them, or maybe more than one. And you also had local corporations that might operate a ferry that was important for communication or transport in their particular area. Then at the other end, you have these huge shipping companies with famous names like White Star and Cunard and P&O, and some of these still survive today. And these were huge organisations with many tens of ships. There's a poster here that was an advert for the Orient Line, the company I showed you with the very first photograph of my presentation here, the Orient Steam Navigation Company. And you can see here this advertises many of the ships that they had, about 10 of them, that went to Australia, and there's a picture of one of them on there. But also bear in mind that other organisations own ships as well. So railway companies were important owners of ships. If you lived in London and wanted to go to France, for example, in the 19th century, what you might do is take a London and North Eastern Railway Company train from London to Southampton, and then take one of their LNER ships from Southampton to France. So think about that, because railway company employees often had similar types of uniform. They look a bit similar to the kind of uniforms that would be worn by merchant navy employees as well. In terms of careers, I'm going to talk about seamen first of all. The very beginning of a seaman's career might start as a ship's boy, which is a very kind of menial task. You might start as an apprentice, or you might start because you'd had some training on a training ship. And I'll say more about all of those three things in a minute. Once you had enough experience, you'd be promoted to what was called an ordinary seaman. And in records, you'll see that abbreviated as ORD, O-R-D, or O-S for ordinary seaman. Then when you'd had enough experience again, you'd be promoted to an able seaman, called an able or an AB for able-bodied seaman. What was the difference between able-bodied and an ordinary seaman? Well, if you know your Gilbert and Sullivan, you'll know that an experienced seaman can hand reef and steer. So he could lay his hand to any rope on the ship and know exactly what would happen if he pulled it. He could reef, he could lay out or take in any sail. He knew what they were all called, he knew what they did, and he could also steer, like the person in the photograph here. He could take the wheel and he could obey navigational instructions. The career structure for officers also kind of falls into three tiers, really. First of all, the training part. Now, you could start as a midshipman. This was kind of a private contract for training, and I'll tell you more about that in a moment. You could be an apprentice, or you could start on a training ship, just as you might do if you were a seaman. But a lot of men, particularly in the Victorian era, worked their way up the ranks. They started maybe as a ship's boy, became an ordinary seaman, an able-bodied seaman, and then were promoted to the role of mate. And there were different levels of ship's mate, which is the sort of most junior ranking of officer. So you might start as a junior mate or a fourth mate, then become a third mate, second mate, first mate, and so on. Some big ships would also have what was called a chief mate or a chief officer as well. After that, you could become a master mariner. Now, that's the official title for what we often call the captain of a ship. And after the mid-19th century, if you wanted to be a first mate, second mate or captain, you had to sit an exam. Before that time, it depended on what experience you'd gained, and ship owners would then choose people based on their perceived ability and their references, if you like.
We hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. To watch the extended, uninterrupted version, go to familyhistory.tv, link in the description. You will also find a host of talks from other experts on a variety of subjects. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified when these videos become available.